Welcome to yet another episode of Risk Grustlers, where we talk about topics in security and risk management from the trenches, especially for non-security heavy audiences. Today, we're being a little lazy with our star cast. We have as guest Nicholas Muy, who's our own CISO.
No, it's great to be here, Aayush. Thanks for the super lazy intro. To be expected. So, Nicholas Muy here. I'm responsible for security at Scrut, and prior to this, have been at, doing this at Expedia, other startups, and was at Department of Homeland Security working on the NIST cybersecurity framework. Sometimes I feel like somehow I inadvertently came full circle working on the NIST cybersecurity framework and now having to live in frameworks and standards and GRC all day.
So in today's episode, I'm actually looking forward to talking about three things. Some of which, by the way, has a very kind of polar kind of reactions, if you will. And the first topic really is somewhat provocative. Is compliance getting commoditized? And this is something that's been spoken about a lot in social media of late. The second topic really is about is security really equal or equivalent to compliance? And if not, to what extent does it overlap? How, and especially in the context of small and medium enterprises, how do companies think about converging the two, if at all? And the third topic really is about how does AI make life easy? How can we use agentic workflows for achieving compliance or GRC goals in general? And I think we've been dogfooding a few use cases. We have some learnings from there, which we'd love to share and get thoughts around. Let's talk about the first point there, which is around, and it's a bit provocative. People seem to have a very polar opinion on this. And I'm sure this question will ruffle a few feathers, but let's talk about the commoditization of audits, especially the SOC 2 and ISO 27001 audits. What's your take on that? Do you think audits or compliance in general has really become commoditized, especially with the advent of the more new age compliance automation tools?
Totally. Fair question and super popular question. I don't think they've been commoditized. I really see it as, if I take a quick step back and start at, I think, why is the question coming up? The compliance frameworks and standards are something that were originally really designed for big organizations with big compliance teams. Those organizations then using these standards and frameworks would actually go down to their suppliers and smaller companies and expect them to follow it. And then as new companies enter the market and new startups try to, I think, provide innovation to bigger customers, then they're expected to follow these frameworks and standards that were never really built for, I think, their size company, for their stage and what they're doing. And so they weren't really, I don't think they were purpose built for that. And so we're really trying to say, hey, everyone, go be compliant with X. But the X was really made for big companies with big teams and a very different kind of perhaps operation. But I do think then the democratization of security frameworks and standards is super important, because I think
Why do you say that?
I think there's a big kind of gap in the information out there about like what people should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And smaller companies aren't going to have big security and compliance teams from their earliest stages. Could be for the first few years. And if they don't have that, then I think they're not going to be able to access the markets to, I think, provide their innovations to bigger companies. And also, they're not going to be investing in security as early as they could be. And there's a lot they could be doing at that stage, even if they're not a big company.
So you're saying essentially that the information asymmetry that has gotten created when some of the standards which were originally meant for large enterprise customers have trickled down to smaller customers, that information asymmetry is causing pain, and is that what is making these frameworks sound onerous, or is there like an industry that's built around managing that information asymmetry for smaller customers?
So I think it's a little bit of all of the above, where because of how onerous it is, about how complicated it is, I think there was a real need for like a lot of these companies to then find a solution. And I think, Scrut and others in the industry have really brought a solution to these companies to actually say like, hey, how can we make sense of this if we don't have all the expertise and information available to us. And making that easier, I think, as a practitioner is super important, because at the end of the day, I want more people to be taking time to invest in compliance and security than less people.
I think there's a bit of FUD around it, especially for SMEs, where there is a certain narrative that the quality of your external audit heavily depends on the amount of money you spend behind it and the number of hours that have gone into carrying out a particular external audit. But I think these two are not really indicators of thoroughness, because if as a small company, the only way for you to get SOC 2 compliant with thoroughness is having to spend, say, $50,000 to $70,000 a year to get yourself externally audited, it becomes cost prohibitive. And then two things happen as a result of that. A, smaller companies are not able to access higher quality revenue. They get eliminated very early on in the sales process. And for larger enterprises, they're not able to access the best innovation out there because smaller startups are nimble. What's really your take on that? I mean, because this seems to be the narrative going around a lot.
Yeah, I hear it a lot, and I would never.
And people make them sound more onerous and esoteric than they really need to be, because ultimately the FUD around it is very high, but it really can boil down to certain simple controls, especially for small and mid-sized companies. So how do you, and you implemented, this is our third year of being SOC 2 compliant. You've done this for us as we've grown from a very small company, 20, 25 people, to more than 200 people now. What's been your experience around that?
That's a great question. In my experience at Expedia and, giving advice to any of my friends about, hey, should I go spend this much on an audit? Should I go just, especially for an early stage company, I've never advised anyone to go do that, because I don't think it necessarily means that you're going to get the quality that you need. Because I think what you have to look for is, does your auditor, that quality really depends on, does your auditor understand your environment? And if your environment is cloud native and you're a cloud native and a remote first company, I think you need to find an auditor who actually understands what that means. One who actually understands beyond, a few random screenshots and asking you about your server room, which really obviously doesn't make any sense for most of us in kind of cloud native companies. They really need to be able to ask you about and kind of look at your cloud configurations, whether you're using a platform or not. They need to understand how that works and what that means for your infrastructure. Just because someone charges a lot of money, you have to still go find out, do they understand how my environment works? Because their ability to audit me is actually dependent on that. I think in addition to that, the other important thing I advise folks on is making sure whatever auditor you choose to work with is one that's willing to actually be peer reviewed by whatever appropriate kind of accreditation, certification body, and for the types of auditors they are. But they need to be, and there needs to be that kind of transparency. I think if that's not there, obviously, then I think there's more questions to ask.
Okay, so switching gears a bit, I think there is also a lot of conversation around, does security mean compliance, or the other way around? Or does compliance mean security? To what extent can your GRC program make you secure? And obviously, this is also one of those provocative topics where opinions are heavily divided, right? And people have very, very strongly held opinions. We've seen conversations sometimes get personal, get acerbic. But I'd like to get a sense of how you feel about it, because we've been on this journey over the last 3 years, right? Where we started, and this is our third year of being SOC 2 compliant. We started when we were and we comply with about 12 frameworks simultaneously. Most recently, ISO 42001, the NEST AI RMF framework as well. I think when we started, we were a 5-people company. We've grown to be a 200 people company now, and a bunch of our security controls got built in response to us trying to be compliant and accessing higher quality revenue. So what's been the journey like there, and where do you stand on this question on how much of compliance is actually security?
my experience for our journey over the last 3 years on this whole, where I think people are trying to say it's compliance versus security, it's been completely different for us, where I feel like it's compliance and security, and they have worked really well together. I think back to, over the past 2.5 years at the beginning, when we were just, much earlier, much smaller company, much fewer employees. We looked at these controls and we were like, okay, we need to go get MDM, we need to go get AV, we need to go make sure our hard drives are encrypted. And so, yeah, sure, we go do these things. We make sure that we're ready and prepared to pass our audits, and we're going to put these controls in place. Fast forward to now, and looking back, those same controls have become much more mature because we started it back then. If we waited until now and said, oh, now we should care, we'd be playing catch up. Because now we have more than 200 employees. We're in 5 different countries, and we have way more of everything going on. We have way more endpoints. We have way more sub-processors.
Even our infra is hosted across 3 different regions.
Exactly. So we have infra in 3 different regions. But we started our BCP DR controls for business continuity and disaster recovery, and making sure we were doing those tests and exercises, and making sure we knew what our recovery point objective time is. We started that back then. Obviously, it looked very different. It was much more basic. Everything was a little smaller and a little simpler. But because we started then for compliance, we actually were able to build a real foundation to become much more mature. Whereas now we can take greater steps that, you go well beyond what is required, based on the risk that our company perceives that we have. And I think if we wait until now to start that and say, oh, now we're a bigger company, now we have the resources, now we should go do this, we'd be starting from scratch. It would be, it would be a huge lift and a big exercise. And I think the argument about security versus compliance misses this thing where it's like, we need time. You need time to mature your controls, right? You need time to build a muscle, like going to the gym or whatever it is. You need time to get better. And I think security versus compliance is like saying you can get better without taking the time to go do it. Even if what got you started was, I think compliance is like, it gets us started, but it's not the end in and of itself. And I think it's been really helpful for us. Because we have, we've invested, we started with just MDM and basic AV, like I said earlier, but now we have a fully fledged endpoint detection and response agent, covering all our endpoints. And that was something we grew into, both in our operations and our infrastructure. And for cloud, we started off with, making sure we had all the CIS benchmark kind of configurations and controls in place and monitoring that. But our cloud infrastructure now is significantly bigger than it was 3 years ago. And we've continued to monitor all those controls, but having to do that as we've grown instead of after we've grown, I think has made a huge difference. And I imagine if we were talking to...
So you've organically matured our security practices in response to us originally trying to be compliant 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I feel like if sure, the reason was like, hey, someone says you need to be this healthy. I was like, well, okay, whether or not I agree, we started, but because we started back then, we're way healthier now.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think for me, the biggest advantage to converging compliance and security and thinking of them together as part of one common goal is that it allows you to bring a lot of focus and it allows you to prioritize the right things. So there's a deluge of security tools out there, multiple scanners, multiple security posture management tools. So I think starting with a set of controls that are pragmatic to you gives you an anchor, especially if you're a small and mid-sized company with not enough security expertise. Really pinning down what makes the most amount of sense for you in terms of your security controls. Those essentially serve as your OKRs for security. Frameworks aside, frameworks are jargon. There's obviously a fair bit of esoteric language out there which is hard to understand on a day-to-day basis. But once you abstract them out and you really distill it down to a certain set of security controls that makes the most amount of sense for you, and you build your security program around that as you grow, I think that's the level of convergence which brings a lot of focus. You're working on things that really matter. You're looking at data in a manner where you can actually draw actionable insights out of it. And I think that convergence has worked well for us.
100%, because I think being able to focus on controls is taking us away from we're not doing this just for audits. We're doing this on what actually matters. And those controls help us really look at, hey, this is reinforcing what we need to do, helping us do it methodically and not randomly. And there are a lot of things we don't need to do because of what kind of company we are. We don't have physical offices, so then we don't need to go do X, but we do need to invest in Y because we have a remote workforce. And I think forcing these conversations earlier, while maybe it was not necessarily the most fun thing to do, I think got us to a place where we wouldn't have been if we didn't start with it.
The next question I want to discuss with you, Nick, is the question around how can companies or products use AI to create meaningful GRC and security outcomes. It's again something that's been talked about a lot, and we want to be very sure about what we were talking about. So we've been dogfooding, and that's just generally been our approach to product development. We are exactly the kind of company that we like selling into small and mid-size with a fairly complicated cloud infra, a very tech-heavy CISO. And so we've been dogfooding several agentic use cases over the last several months to really build conviction around what's material and what's useful. Would be good to talk about some of our experiences there, Nick. How we've used AI and agents to create meaningful GRC and security outcomes. So would love to understand your experience there.
Totally.
Where have you seen value being generated? Where have you seen life being made easier? And where have you, in fact, the counterpoint to it, since we're being completely transparent here, where have you seen some limitations to it?
Yeah, no, totally. Like you said, we live so many of these problems. We have pain points. We don't have unlimited resources, just like everybody else. So we have to figure out, me specifically, I have to figure out how are we going to maintain our security posture, whether it's for the maturity that we're at and the compliance frameworks that we're responsible for getting audited and certified to every year, and also making sure very important programs in our security and GRC function are actually operating at the pace of the company's growth and at the scale that we need it to be, without having a giant team and unlimited resources to do that. One area where, and across all these areas, as we've been kind of dog fooding this, some people say it's like drink your own champagne. Some people say it's dog food, because who actually eats dog food? It's a philosophical question. But we've been working with these agentic teammates in our organization to really, I think, be able to do so much more than we would have otherwise been able to do with a small team. We don't have a big team, maybe a small point of contention between you and I, but we only need a big enough team. That's fair. First area that I've really found it to be helpful for our team is basically in enforcing and kind of maintaining our security posture. And what does that mean? So that means, is MDM where it needs to be on all the devices it needs to be all the time? And usually I would have, someone on my team go follow up, make sure oh, hey, this week, we have a number of endpoints for whatever reason, they're not checking in, and they're not checking in regularly. So now this is something that can be completely given to an agent to go follow up on, making sure not only that it's there, but that it is configured the way that it needs to be, that it's actually installed and looking for
because employees have follow-up questions that
exactly.
They would typically message the IT teams on or call up the IT teams on.
And that's definitely a very real
That's a repetitive
thing.
overhead.
We have numerous Slack messages where the IT team is getting asked questions, and they can only answer so many questions so quickly. And then for me as a CISO, if all my endpoints are only as configured only as well as the IT person can answer questions, as someone cares enough to reach out, then it's not good for us as a whole. And there's a lot of versions of this, whether it's MDM, whether it's EDR, whether it's we have a zero trust network access, agent, and whether it's any of these things, a lot of it really is very much making do we have enough people available to answer these questions? Who's going to answer these questions? What kind of information do they need to answer these questions? Because if they're not able to communicate and follow up with this person, this employee, then it means it's not going to get done. And the employee, what they really need is they need the reminder, they need the follow-up, and they need the information that they need to get this done easily. And if we're able to work with agentic teammates to do that, and they can get out to these employees at a time that is convenient for the employees, in a way that is convenient for the employees, then it's better for me and my team to actually go focus on bigger problems that we have. More strategic questions about like what else we need to think about, changing regulations, updates to frameworks. That's been one major pain point that this has been super helpful. I think another one has been in third-party risk management, and I think we talked about earlier, when we started, we had only a few vendors, all the usual. We have AWS, we have GitHub, we have Slack, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward to now, we have we have so many vendors, we have so many. And that's just part of a growing company. We have teams that it's their job to stay on the bleeding edge of how to solve their problems, whether it's our marketing team trying to use the latest and greatest and what technology they should be using and adopting as a marketing team, or the sales team, or the engineering team. I don't desire, as a security professional, for them to not try new technology that they need to do their jobs better, to make the company better. But I do need to make sure that the vendors that they're considering, that the vendors that they want to onboard, are consistently looked at. And I think a lot of people I know and talk to, none of us have enough time, resources, and people to properly assess every vendor that we have. I think a big thing that I just come back to time and time again is like, if you say, I'm going to only assess the vendors that matter, and that's going to be based on this criteria, these are my top tier critical P0 vendors, how did you figure out that the other vendors aren't if you have 500, 200, or 2,000 of them? And so agentic teammates for us has been super helpful to actually say, let's exhaustively assess all the vendors to actually determine which ones are the ones to go deeper on. Because I don't think, and look, a lot of us, when faced with limited resource constraints and time, we do have to make prioritization decisions. I saw this at
Which may not
Expedia.
always be as scientific as you'd like them to be.
It almost never is as scientific as we'd like it to be, or as the books say it should be. But I tell you, I won't name any names, but me and all the folks I talk to on a regular basis at many Fortune 500 companies, late stage, multi-thousand employee, very well-funded startups, they're all facing the same problem that I'm facing as well, where it's like, we have a lot of vendors, they're not getting assessed consistently. And I would rather focus on the risk those vendors are introducing to our environment and what kind of risk that is, what kind of product they're providing, because we all know that the same company for two different customers has different third-party risk, because those two customers could be using the same product differently, could be using different products altogether from the same company. And that just looking at the company generically is not a way to kind of determine, oh, this is a high or low risk vendor, I don't need to go through the full assessment. I think we actually have to find a way, how can we do that at scale? And agentic teammates can go through exhaustively all our vendors, follow up with all of them.
And also automatically reviewing the responses and creating a point of view on risks, generating follow-up actions, and retaining context during a subsequent assessment from the previous assessment. Because the areas where the vendors turned out to be weak during the previous assessment, they need to be probed deeper during subsequent assessments.
Yes, and I think that's the only,
because humans would keep sending boilerplates.
And a lot of times the vendors will complain to the buyers inside the company, who then will complain to me that my team is not getting back to the vendor fast enough. Vendors, traditionally before having agentic teammates, the vendor would be like, oh, I've provided the information to the security team. And then but the security team hasn't given me any feedback on the assessment. And then someone, one of our illustrious colleagues will come to me and be like, Nick, where is this? Why is this being held up? I was like, well,
it's in the queue.
It's in the queue. I mean, file a ticket. And now we can get through these much quicker, much more effectively. And we can look at, I think, bigger questions of like, okay, what other ways can we kind of go deeper where we need to, and not go deep where we don't. And I think also in the TPRM thing, context is important, right? Having been on the vendor side and on the vendor side right now, being on both sides is like, I've received a number of questionnaires, even in previous jobs, from customers or prospective customers that the sales team was like, Nick, we got to go fill this out. Where it's clear the customer has no idea what we're selling, because the TPRM program at that customer has never actually spoken with the person in their company buying our product. And then they send me an assessment that's asking me all these questions about my factory and my quality controls for the factory that I operate and manufacture things, of which I most definitely have never been the CISO for. So the third pain point for us has been, cloud is a huge part of our business. We are a cloud native company, and the amount of infrastructure, services, resources that we're using in the cloud has only grown just exponentially. It feels like, we're deployed in 3 regions simultaneously. All of these are active. There are customers in all of them. They're taking production traffic. Our team is shipping code on a regular, very frequent basis. And we have so much happening. And then we're also getting a lot of, and what's totally normal is like, if you're operating in cloud, you're going to have misconfigurations. You're going to have controls that may need to be enforced and will come up. Basically, it's like, it's only normal. We're going to have hundreds. It used to be we had tens, maybe 10, 20, 30 findings. And now on a weekly, monthly basis, we might have hundreds of findings across our cloud infrastructure, now being in 3 regions. Now the engineering team is shipping at a huge, much greater velocity than they were. How do I keep up with that? How am I supposed to keep up with that? How am I supposed to make sense of it? How's my team supposed to make sense of it? Because I'm always not around to make sense of it for them. Because, everyone has different levels of expertise and exposure to cloud specifically too. Not every, and no knock on everyone has different expertise, but not even every analyst or person on my team is going to have the same level of expertise on cloud. And if they're expected to make sure that these controls are getting resolved in the time that they need to on an annual basis, continuously, the people they have to work with need information in the right way at the right time to actually solve this. And the people in the engineering team, I assure you, they do not want random junk sent to them by my team. They will tell me to my face, and they will let me know that it's just going to take away credibility. How do we get context? How do we prioritize across all these findings? Not all these findings are created equal, right? CIS benchmark, or whether it's CIS benchmark or AWS well-architected framework, these are important things to do. These are important things that matter. They don't take into account where these assets are. They don't take into account what these assets are. Is this S3 bucket for my production application with customer data in it? Or is this S3 bucket in a pre-prod environment? Or is this AWS bucket in a dev environment? Whatever it is, lab, sandbox, pre-prod, non-prod, I think that asset context is important. And agentic teammates can actually take that into account in prioritizing which findings to go after. Whereas an analyst on my team traditionally, just I guess in the last couple of years would have had to go through all these findings, collate them, toggle back and forth. They'd look at our asset register, they'd look at the findings, and maybe they could do it. And if they could be really smart about it, they can try to do it quickly. They could put it all into a table. Now we don't have to do that because that just takes up too much time, and we have too many assets and too many findings. But we also have to make sense of it. And I'm not a fan of let's just turn off this control. I'm never a fan of let's just ignore this blanketly, because as soon as you do that, there will be one finding that is important, and you would have missed it because of all the other noise that was generated. And there's a balance. Sure, there's a way the monitoring can be done better, but the agentic teammates are really here to help us get that feedback on an ongoing basis too. Here's where it matters, taking my company's asset context, taking, also what controls my company has to worry about, and having all that in one place, and then an agentic teammate that actually leverages that information for me as an end user and as a stakeholder, and it only helps us get
and also guiding the
done.
engineers
Yes.
for remediation steps at the last mile.
And that's even just to do one half of the job. Then the other half of the job is when you are able to get the right things that are prioritized manually or otherwise, then you have to get to the engineering team, you have to get to the DevOps team, you have to share it with them asynchronously, get their feedback, get on a meeting live with them depending on how urgent it is. And you have to walk them through, because they'll say like, okay, how important is this really? Like, why is this important? Like, how? Because I think the DevOps team are asking fair questions. They're saying like, how worried do I need to be? How much do I need to put into this to fix it? Is this like a one-time thing? Is this ongoing? There's a lot of questions the DevOps team has, and they need that information.
Or is a cleaner way for me to fix
Yeah.
it instead of having to go through multiple clicks on a console and then just going at the back end and fixing it? Can I just push a quick and dirty Terraform code that fixes it for me?
Yeah, and they also, it's sort of like, yeah, we can give them all these knowledge base articles, we can give them these how-to guides, but they don't want that. They're like, okay, they know how to do their job, but they're like, if they have trust that this has been vetted, contextualized, and prioritized, then they're like, if you can give me a code snippet, if you can give me a snippet of Terraform or CloudFormation, and then I can go run that in there, then and specific to my environment, then I'm more likely to go do it. Otherwise, it's going to be this long conversation about what sprint can we get into?
Yeah.
When do we have time? I've never met an engineering team that was like, oh, you know what? We have so much time in this sprint.
Yeah.
So
and
glad
security typically operates with more urgency than your sprint cycles.
Yes, and so glad you brought me extra work to put into my sprint where I have so much free time. Said no engineer ever.
So thank you, Nick, for taking time out to share your thoughts and your journey, which incidentally happens to be mine too. I think our fates are locked in here, but thanks a lot for being candid here, for being transparent here, and to our viewers, thanks for watching. Would love your feedback on all the topics that we discussed. The goal for us with this podcast series has consistently been to engage the community, get feedback, get responses to some of the things that we've been discussed, that have been discussed. So thanks again for watching. We'll be back soon with yet another episode where we address some of these topics from the trenches. So thank you.
And thanks for having me. So it's been great to be here. And, I think for me, it's been a big motivation for why I think, it's not security versus compliance, and like we can figure this out. And so that's why we're here.